Hello friends of Open Circle. This is Brittany from Open Circle of Hopkins, and today we're going to take a look at the history of America's national parks. How on earth did these parks come to be? In the mid-1800s, a small group of people had a vision, what writer Wallace Stegner has called the best idea America ever had, to make sure that our greatest natural treasures would belong to everyone and remain preserved forever. Let's take a look at how exactly these parks came to be.
From the Grand Canyon to Mount Rushmore to the Blue Ridge Mountains, the National Park Service, it's the government agency responsible for maintaining America's abundance of natural and cultural wonders. By the mid-1800s, American settlers were moving west and discovering new landscapes as they laid claims to lands in Texas, California, New Mexico, and Arizona. Many Americans were enamored with the natural beauty of the Trans-Mississippi West, which was so different from the East Coast and Europe. Some enterprising travelers realized these natural sites would make good spots for tourism and recreation. In 1855, a British man named James Hopkins, along with two Indian guides, visited the Yosemite Valley and began to write articles promoting California's scenic wonders. Almost overnight, Yosemite became a destination. It was so popular that President Abraham Lincoln put it under protection during the Civil War. But Yosemite was not the first national park. In 1872, President Ulysses S. Grant declared Yellowstone the first ever national park. It wasn't until 1890 that John Muir, a Scottish-American naturalist, successfully convinced Congress to protect the Yosemite area. Muir would continue to have a major influence on the creation and preservation of new parks, along with President Theodore Roosevelt. Between 1901 and 1909, President Teddy Roosevelt, who believed that experiencing nature was instrumental in building American character, created 5 new parks, including Yosemite, and claimed over 100 million acres of national forest. He also signed the 1906 Antiquities Act, which gave the President of the United States authority to create national monuments from federal lands. National parks were springing up all over the country, but it wasn't until 1916 that President Woodrow Wilson signed an act to establish a National Park Service run by the federal government. The Organic Act gathered the 14 national parks and 21 national monuments into a federal system. Congress declared the fundamental purpose of the national park system to conserve the scenery and the natural and historic objects and the wildlife therein, and to provide for the enjoyment of the same in such manner and by such means as will leave them unimpaired for the enjoyment of future generations. Over the next 2 decades, Congress expanded the national park system, adding the Grand Canyon, Bryce Canyon, Acadia, the Great Smoky Mountains, and Shenandoah to the list of national parks. Throughout the 20th century, the service continued to expand, thanks to some important pieces of legislation. The Historic Sites Act of 1935 allowed the government to give historic properties protected status. The Wilderness Act of 1965 created a policy of securing wilderness areas for the benefit of the American people. In 1990, the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act required museums, including those in the national parks, to return excavated remains to their cultural descendants. By its 100th anniversary in 2016, the National Park Service employed more than 20,000 people and upwards of 300,000 volunteers, presiding over more than 400 parks, monuments, and other sites. Today, the National Park Service still works with communities across America, preserving nature, local history, and providing the public with places to explore, learn, and reflect.
Thank you to the History Channel for that wonderful video. So the very first national park in the United States was Yellowstone National Park. Teddy Roosevelt said that he wanted to preserve this land for the benefit and enjoyment of the people. A bill creating the first national park was signed into law by President Ulysses S. Grant in 1872. Here we have an archway leading into Yellowstone, and at the very top, it's inscribed with "for the benefit and enjoyment of the people," and this was built the year the park was open and is still standing today. So what do we know about Yellowstone? When I think of Yellowstone, I think of geysers. Yellowstone National Park has over 300 active geysers. The most famous one erupts every 92 minutes. Do you know what it's called? If you guessed Old Faithful, you'd be correct. Yellowstone has over 290 waterfalls. It is larger than the size of Rhode Island and Delaware combined. 2.2 million acres total. It's a lot of land. Yellowstone's dedication in 1872 did not instantly make it well known as a destination. Getting to and navigating the land required ability to cross treacherous terrain at the time. It wasn't until the Northern Pacific Railroad was built that people started to travel to Yellowstone. And it also increased lodging and tours and staffing throughout the park and increased the number of visitors. On the top right photo, you see a tourist camp within Yellowstone, and that was taken in 1923. And on the bottom left is a picture of a giant geyser with 2 tourists. A lot of wildlife lives in Yellowstone, including grizzly bears, wolves, bison, and elk. And throughout the whole world, over half of the world's geysers are all found in Yellowstone National Park. So what role did Teddy Roosevelt play in all of this? Theodore Roosevelt was a US president from 1901 to 1909. He worked with Congress to sign legislation to promote and protect our nation's beauty. Here's a quote that Teddy Roosevelt said after seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time. He said, "Do nothing to mar its grandeur, for the ages have been at work on it, and a man cannot do anything to improve it. Keep this for your children, your children's children, and all who come after you, as the one great sight which every American should see." And after that visit to the Grand Canyon, he felt very moved to protect these beautiful parts of our country. So Yosemite National Park was our 3rd national park. First was Yellowstone, and the second was Sequoia National Park, very nearby to Yosemite. So Yosemite was established on October 1st, 1890. It is 1,200 square miles of scenic wildlands. The park ranges from 2,000 to 13,000 feet above sea level. The area's first residents were Native Americans who inhabited the region perhaps as long ago as 7,000 to 10,000 years ago. Can you tell me where Yosemite is located? If you guessed California, you would be correct. Here we have a photo of some of those early leaders in the national park movement. John Muir and Theodore Roosevelt are standing in front of the grizzly giant in the Mariposa Big Tree Grove. The tree behind them, as you can see, behind the multiple men standing in line, is huge, and that kind of a tree is called a sequoia tree. This was taken in 1903 in what is now Yosemite National Park. Theodore Roosevelt once said, "The conservation of our natural resources and their proper use constitute the fundamental problem which underlies almost every other problem of our national life." Here we have a photo of Theodore Roosevelt on the left, and on the right is environmentalist John Muir. In 1906, Roosevelt signed the Act for the Preservation of American Antiquities, giving the president the power to officially declare natural and historic sites situated on government land as national monuments. This all happened after he went on a camping trip with John Muir, who convinced him to take the time to come and see for himself what destruction was happening to the Yosemite Valley. I don't know about you, but I don't think many people convinced the President of the United States to go on a camping trip with them. Let's learn a bit about John Muir. He's known as the champion of the woods. He was born in 1838 and passed away in 1914 at the age of 76. We know that he was born in Scotland, but he moved to Wisconsin as a child. He was an engineer, a naturalist, philosopher, writer, botanist, geologist, and environmentalist. He wrote articles urging the United States government to preserve our country's natural beauty. He helped push for the U.S. Congress to pass a bill in 1890 establishing Yosemite National Park, and he really played a very big role in writing letters to politicians and spreading the word amongst fellow Americans that this land needed to be protected. Here are some well-known quotes that you might have heard before. "The mountains are calling and I must go. In every walk with nature, one receives far more than he seeks. Climb the mountains and get their good tidings." John Muir. When John Muir was 11 years old, he moved with his family from Scotland to Wisconsin. In 1867, he felt like going on a walk from Indiana all the way to Florida. He traveled to every continent in his lifetime, with the exception of Antarctica. And we mentioned that he went on a camping trip with Teddy Roosevelt in 1903, who was president at the time. Today, he is well known as the father of the national parks. He really played an integral part in the creation of these parks. And he founded the Sierra Club, which is an American conservation organization that is still around today. So we noted when these national parks were started, but it's important to note that they were all started prior to any governing body overlooking them. It wasn't until 1916 that the national parks were springing up everywhere, and it was decided that the National Park Service had to be created. Many of the parks at that time lacked protection and funding, so it was crucial that there become an organization to protect them. Private commercial interests, including hotels, railroads, ranches, and sawmills, saw great profit potential in the parks and began to exploit their resources, often relatively unchecked. Once the National Park Service was started, none of those things were allowed for personal profit. In 1916, President Woodrow Wilson signed the act creating the National Park Service, a new federal bureau in the Department of the Interior responsible for protecting our 35 national parks. The purpose was to promote preservation of our parks, in addition to the federal government being responsible for tending to and staffing them. Here are some of our most well-known national parks today, and the very earliest ones. We talked about Yellowstone, Yosemite, and Sequoia. We also have Mount Rainier in Washington came forth, and then Glacier in Montana, the Rocky Mountains in Colorado, Zion National Park in Utah, the Grand Canyon in Arizona, Acadia in Maine, the Grand Tetons in Wyoming, the Great Smoky Mountains in Tennessee and North Carolina, Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, Olympic in Washington, Mount Rushmore in South Dakota, and our very own in Minnesota, Voyageurs National Park in 1971. Here's a map of all of our national parks throughout the United States. I'm sure many of you have been on some road trips throughout your lifetime or vacations traveling to national parks. I myself, my favorite is Rocky Mountain National Park. I've been there 4 times. I also grew up going on a lot of road trips to the Badlands. I've also been to Wind Cave National Park, which is in South Dakota. Let's learn a bit about some of these national parks. Rocky Mountain National Park was established in 1915, the year before the National Park Service was founded. It is located in Colorado and spans the Continental Divide, encompassing mountains, forests, and alpine tundra. It's known for the Trail Ridge Road and the Old Fall River Road, which are roads that you can drive today that were built back in 1915. Many of them without guardrails, I might add. The park is dominated by Long's Peak, which is visible from many vantage points. Each year, thousands of people attempt to scale it. I am not one of them. Here's a picture of the Rockies, their iconic snow-capped mountains. Elevation on park roads range between 7,800 and 12,183 feet, the highest point being on Trail Ridge Road. At this lofty spot, there's 35% less oxygen in the air than at sea level. Atop 14,259-foot Long's Peak, the highest mountain in the park, oxygen levels are even 50% less. Some more beautiful pictures of the snow-capped mountains. Grand Canyon National Park is located in Arizona. Although first afforded federal protection in 1893 as a forest reserve and later as a national monument, Grand Canyon did not achieve national park status until 1919, 3 years after the creation of the national park system. The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long and up to 18 miles wide at some points. It took 3 to 6 million years to form the Grand Canyon. Erosion continues to alter its walls today, and it was formed by the Colorado River. The Grand Canyon has maybe 70 species of mammals, 250 species of birds, 25 types of reptiles, and 5 species of amphibians. The Colorado River, as I mentioned, is what formed the Grand Canyon, which flows west through the canyon and averages about 300 feet in width and 100 feet in depth, flowing at an average speed of 4 miles per hour. Here's a photo of the Grand Canyon with some tourists overlooking. Here we have a photo of Stephen Mather, the first director of the National Park Service, who's standing on the far left of this photo, and he is with his Grand Canyon designated superintendents. This was taken in 1921. Zion National Park in Utah was established in 1920. It is in southwestern Utah, and it is a nature preserve distinguished by Zion Canyon's steep red cliffs. The park is named after the Hebrew word for Zion. The word translates as a place of peace and relaxation. Within Zion National Park, there is an area called Weeping Rock. In this area, the water that can be seen oozing from the rock surfaces has taken more than 1,000 years to travel through the stone from its source in a natural underground spring. Here are the beautiful red rocks of Zion. Grand Teton National Park in northwestern Wyoming is due south of Yellowstone. The park covers 300,000 acres. At 13,770 feet, the Grand Teton itself is only the second highest mountain in Wyoming. In 1929, President Calvin Coolidge went against enormous public opposition and approved the original 96,000-acre park, which encompassed the Teton Range and 6 glacial lakes. In 1943, President Franklin D. Roosevelt established the 210,000-acre Jackson Hole National Monument to protect the remaining federal lands on the valley floor. In 1950, President Harry S. Truman and Congress merged the monument, the national park, and a 35,000-acre donation from John D. Rockefeller to create the 310,000 Grand Teton National Park we visit today. Here are pictures of the Grand Tetons. Beautiful. A lot of fly fishermen. The Great Smoky Mountains were established in 1934. They straddle the border between North Carolina and Tennessee. There you will find streams, rivers, and waterfalls appearing along hiking routes that include a segment of the Appalachian Trail. Did you know that parts of Disney's hit 1950s TV series, Davy Crockett, King of the Wild Frontier, was filmed inside Great Smoky Mountains National Park? Here are some pictures of the Great Smoky Mountains. Shenandoah National Park was founded in 1935. It extends along the Blue Ridge Mountains in the U.S. state of Virginia. Mostly forested, the park features wetlands, waterfalls, and rocky peaks like Hawksbill and Old Rag Mountains. Shenandoah is home to many bird species, plus deer, squirrels, and the elusive black bear. I have visited this park before. It's very beautiful. Olympic National Park is located in the state of Washington. It is 922,000 acres of land, including an alpine forest, and is also home to one of the few temperate rainforests in the world. It's beautiful. Voyageurs National Park is in our home state of Minnesota. It is named Voyageurs after the French-Canadian fur traders believed to be the first non-natives to travel through the region on a regular basis. The waterways that flow through Voyageurs National Park were extremely important to the fur trade in the late 1600s and 1700s. Some of the Earth's oldest exposed rock formations can be seen here. Have you ever been to Voyageurs National Park? Here we have a map of where it's located. We've got Duluth down here and the north shore of Lake Superior. And way up here on the very border of Canada is Voyageurs National Park. This is a very early photo of the park of Camp Marston, and that was taken in 1938.